ran into a phrase that seemed to apply to me, and that was that I was going through the dark night of the soul. A period of time where you have suffered so much loss and you're enduring so much grief that your entire structure of your life comes into question. You question where you live, what you do, what your passions are, how you want to spend your time, and it's as though you take your life and you throw it up in the air and you examine yourself and how this grief is going to impact your life. Well, I grew up in a very hilly part of the San Francisco Bay Area. We had broad pear orchards all around us, but beyond the pear orchards, there were some very hilly areas. And I grew up, of course, riding a bicycle like every other kid in the area. And I soon realized that going uphill was pretty torturous, and it would really be nice to be able to have a motor to pull you uphill, and then you could enjoy riding two wheels all the time instead of just going downhill. So when I was 11 years old, I bought a little 2-horsepower mini bike, stood about 2 feet tall, had a little lawnmower engine in it. And I got on that thing and I just felt the freedom and the independence and the adventure of being able to go wherever I wanted to go without pedaling. And that was the beginning of a lifelong passion. In 2005, I was working as the head of leveraged finance for AIG in Houston, which meant that I had responsibility for a group which managed $20 billion of high-risk assets, things like high-yield bonds, bank debt, emerging market debt. We were one of the largest managers of this kind of debt in the entire world. So that was my position. But while I was at AIG, I found repeated incidences of accounting fraud that was occurring within the high-yield bond portfolio that I had taken on the responsibility of managing. Enron, of course, was also a Houston-based company, and I had friends and neighbors that worked at Enron. And one of those friends was a very influential senior executive at Enron who ended up serving 5.5 years at a federal penitentiary here in Texas for his role in the accounting fraud at Enron. So watching what happened to him in his life as a result of his inaction at Enron certainly entered into my thinking about how I wanted to deal with a fraud at AIG. I eventually decided to blow the whistle on the fraud. And after 20 years with the company and increasing levels of responsibility and compensation, I was fired in 2005 for no reason, no stated reason. I hired the brashest, cockiest, most arrogant New York Park Avenue lawyer that money could buy, and we went after AIG for retaliation against a whistleblower. And because of my position with the company being fairly senior, AIG did not want this to become public, so we reached an out-of-court settlement in 2005, which was certainly enough money for me to take the rest of my life off and walk away from what became a very, very stressful career. Well, initially I had this feeling of euphoria. Here I was 54 years old and enough money in my bank to take the rest of my life off. I felt like I was free and independent and ready to take on the world. But then you realize how much you leave behind. I had a corporate career of 30 years. I had power and prestige and steady income coming in. And within a matter of seconds, it was all wiped away. So initially I was okay, but then I gradually slipped into what you'd call a depression. I felt irrelevant and a little bit kicked to the curb, and I felt that I had been treated very, very illegally as well as unethically. Motorcycles have always been what I call my soft place to fall. I mean, when I needed just time to be away, time to get away from the anxieties and the stresses of life, and motorcycling became, has always been a very important part of my mental health. Since I was 11, I've always had motorcycles, but never more than 3 or 4 at a time. But I loved finding and restoring old vintage motorcycles. So as I began my retirement, I spent a lot of my time just driving around Texas with a trailer, buying up old motorcycles and bringing them home. My wife was not always delighted to see me pull up into the driveway with my vehicle kind of put together like Jed Clampett's truck in the Beverly Hillbillies. We had all kinds of stuff I brought home. She knew it was part of what I enjoyed in life. Well, she used to have a policy that every time I spent $1 on a motorcycle, she got $1 for whatever she wanted. Around 2008, 2009 was when AIG blew itself up, and it required the $200 billion plus federal bailout in order to stay solvent. And the whole organization came crumbling down. That really was the time and the event that gave me the impetus to write my book, because I could see from my vantage point that AIG was a very corrupt organization, but I had no clue that it had risen to the magnitude that it became. I found myself getting most of my motivation for writing the book late in the evening, maybe 8, 9 o'clock. I'd sit down and start writing, and I would write until the next morning. Just a flood of emotion would come through to me. So I wrote the book, and then up until 2017 or so, I was very busy with speaking and promoting the book, traveling a lot, which I really enjoyed. I'd walk into an auditorium like at the University of Texas or University of Arkansas, and there would be 500 students all taking Accounting 101, and they got to sit there and listen to some guy talk about ethics. So it was always a challenge, but I felt good about the experience of trying to educate younger people and to share with them the ethical dilemmas that they might very well run into in the workplace. So that continued up until 2017, and that's when my wife of 43 years was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer. 7 months after her diagnosis, she passed away in early 2018. We'd been married, happily married for 43 years, so clearly I was devastated. But that's 5 years ago now, and you know, it's not as intense, the grief is not as intense, and it's not as frequent, but it's still there. The 2 older kids are fully independent and doing extremely well. And unfortunately, I lost my younger son in 2021. Yeah, Hunter was the kind of the brooding, creative genius who had incredible artistic capabilities, but he was also a kid that suffered from a lot of social anxiety, very low self-esteem, and he used alcohol as a means of coping with his social anxiety. And unfortunately, he continued and drank increasingly until he passed away in 2021 at the age of 31. Almost 3 years exactly after my wife passed away. And you know, when you lose a wife, you know, it's absolutely devastating, and your life is completely changed. But in time, you rely on your family and your friends and your neighbors, and you know, life continues on. And at the 3-year mark, I was kind of at that point. I was feeling a sense of, okay, I'm letting go of the grief. It's still there. It's never going to go away, but I can manage it. And then after my son died, very unexpectedly, all that grief came roaring back. New grief for Hunter and old grief for Barbara. I just questioned everything that I had held to be true. Whereas when Barbara passed away, I relied on my neighbors, I relied on my church, I relied on my family, I relied on the structure of my life to sustain me. After Hunter died, all that came into question. It was, you know, it wasn't enough for me just to fall back on what I fell back on before. And just for 2 or 3 months, I remember just not knowing what in the world I was going to do with myself. The conclusion that I came to was that whatever I did with my life from this point on, it had to involve a lot of connectivity with people. And I felt like I really needed to move. I needed to get out of the old Woodlands community where I lived, where all the memories were abounding everywhere I looked. And so I felt a lot of sadness. I described it as, I feel like there's ghosts in my house and I can't control that. So I knew I had to move, and when I found this building, and it was near my daughter, and the building was for sale, and it was perfect for motorcycles, and I had 63 motorcycles, and miraculously, the whole thing came together, and 2 months after I visited, I owned the building and had a wild plan for setting up a motorcycle museum. These were the motorcycles that I have to admit I lusted after as a kid, but could ill afford while making $1.50 an hour pumping gas. So these motorcycles kind of registered in my brain as objects of desire at a very young age. And as I became an adult and acquired some financial independence, it just made sense for me to invest in these works of art, not only for my own personal satisfaction, but I think also for some appreciation over time. They've been proven to be a very good investment over the last 10 years. So, but I like to pick the motorcycles from the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. Those were my formative years as a young motorcyclist, and the bikes I remember the most from my childhood. It's just been very heartwarming to have the museum and to almost instantly have a common bond with strangers who walk in the door. And we get to talking about motorcycles and sort of nothing else matters. The settlement gave me the opportunity to really do whatever I wanted within reason after my son passed away. And a lot of whistleblowers have pretty sad endings. Their careers are ended, they can't find work anywhere else. But somehow, I don't know, the grace of God or good fortune or whatever, I have been able to endure the experience of being a whistleblower and take that money and do with it exactly what I wanted to do, where I wanted to do it, when I wanted to do it, and with whom I wanted to do it with. For me, dealing with grief and loss, it's a horrible, sometimes unending process. But I think for most people, you get through it. You don't totally get through it because it's always going to be there. But you can't let that grief and that loss control your outlook for the future. And in some cases, death can result in positive changes. In my case, I had the opportunity to move out to the hill country and to pursue something that I might not have otherwise pursued. So I think it's just extremely important that for anybody who's suffered loss and grief, to bear in mind that you will get through it and that on the other side can be a whole brave new world for you.